Amarantha Vale woke up with the first rays of the November sun. The numbers on the electronic clock showed -1 in the morning. Thanksgiving this year. She'd insisted the holiday be held at their house. She wanted to make an impression, especially Camden. Tobias was asleep next to her. Asleep, he looked almost like a boy, serene, defenseless. Amarantha allowed herself a slight smile. 3rd year of marriage. And she still couldn't get used to his utter naivety, to how easy he was to control. She slipped out of bed, careful not to wake her husband. She needed time to get ready to clean herself up. Tobias could only get in the way. He always ruined everything with his indecision, his doubts, his stupid questions. In the kitchen, Amarantha turned on the coffee maker and pulled out the list of dishes she had planned for today. Traditional turkey cranberry sauce, sweet potato pie, and the special pear dessert that Camden loved so much. She remembered all his preferences, every little detail. The noise of the coffee maker drowned out the sound of footsteps, and she flinched when Tobias hugged her from behind. "You're early today," he murmured, snuggling into her neck. "Lots to do." Amarantha slipped out of his embrace. "You want your father to be pleased, don't you?" Tobias grimaced. "I don't understand why you care so much about his opinion." Amarantha barely contained her irritation. "Because he's your father and your boss. By the way, and without him, you would never have married me," Tobias said abruptly, and Amarantha froze. He'd been saying things like that a lot lately, as if he suspected something. "Don't be absurd," she smiled strainedly, and held out a cup of coffee to him. "Better give me a hand, we need to marinate the turkey." As they worked in the kitchen, Amarantha thought back to their first meeting. It had been 5 years ago. She'd just gotten a job as a secretary at Camden Vale's company, a prestigious position for a trailer park girl, with no connections and no good education. But she had looks and a sharp mind. It was enough to impress Camden at the interview. At the time, though, she wasn't planning on becoming part of the Vale family. She just wanted a steady job, maybe a job as an assistant manager. But then one day Tobias walked into her father's office, an awkward, shy architect with a talent that no one noticed. No one but her. "What are you thinking about?" Tobias's voice brought her back to the present. "About the first time we met." She didn't bother to lie. "Remember when you came by with that old neighborhood redevelopment project? The one my father trashed to pieces." Tobias grinned bitterly. "And you brought me coffee afterward and told me the project was great." "It was liar, you just took pity on me." Amarantha touched his cheek. "I saw something in you that your father didn't." "And what was that true talent?" She kissed him on the lips. "Now get to work on the garnish while I cook the turkey." Tobias obediently began chopping vegetables, and Amarantha furtively checked her phone. One new message from Camden. "I'll see you tonight, looking forward to it." She deleted it and went back to cooking. Her thoughts took her back to the past again. Back then, 5 years ago, she'd made Tobias her project. He was the key that opened the door to the world of the wealthy. -1 months later, they started dating. Another year later, Tobias proposed to her. Camden, I remember, wasn't thrilled, especially when he found out she was pregnant. She miscarried in the 13th week. Camden seemed relieved. Tobias was more grieving than she was. The wedding had been modest. Camden had paid for everything, but was barely smiling himself. As Tobias chopped the vegetables, Amarantha watched him furtively. He had changed over the years, tougher, more confident, but deep down, he was still the same, always craving his father's approval, which he never got at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. The doorbell rang. "Your father." Amarantha wiped her hands on her apron. Tobias tensed. "He always comes before the appointed time to take us by surprise." Amarantha fixed her hair. "Go open the door." Camden Vale entered the house, looking as always like the man who owned everything around him. Paul trim with a streak of graying on his temples that only made him more attractive. Age had left noble wrinkles on his face, without spoiling the thoroughbred beauty. Tobias. He nodded to his son. handing him a bottle of expensive whiskey. His gaze slid over her with deliberate indifference. Looking lovely as always, glad you could make it, Camden. She accepted his coat. We've seen so little of each other lately. Company business, he shrugged. By the way, Tobias, what's going on with the Hillside Park project? The investors are getting nervous. Tobias gave a barely perceptible wince. Everything's on schedule, father. Really, and I've been informed of problems with the drainage system. I resolved that issue yesterday. You resolved. Camden stretched out doubtfully. Or did you merely sign what the engineers had prepared? Amarantha saw her husband's shoulders tense. Shall we discuss the work later? She intervened. Today is a holiday. After all, Camden smiled, but his eyes remained cold. Of course. Just wanted to make sure my son was doing well. They walked to the living room. Tobias poured his father a whiskey. How's Octavia doing? Amarantha asked. I miss her. Who frowned? Camden, your housekeeper. Octavia getting old. Getting forgetful. We should find a replacement for her. She's been working for the Wilds for 30 years. Tobias pointed out. So sentimentality doesn't mix well with business. She's part of the family, Tobias insisted. You have a strange idea of family, son. At dinner the tension only grew. Camden savored the turkey, lavishing compliments on Amarantha's culinary talents, but never missing an opportunity to prick his son. Do you remember, Tobias? When you were a kid you refused to eat turkey, said they were too pretty to kill. He laughed. Mother used to freak out then. And you were even mistaken for a vegetarian in college. That was a long time ago. Tobias tried to speak calmly, but Amarantha could see the white of his knuckles, clutching his fork. You've always been sensitive, though, haven't you? I remember you crying over a C in math. I was 9 years old and in high school. Because of that girl. What's her name? Lorelei, Tobias said in a muffled voice. Yeah, Lorelei. God, what a drama that was. Almost killed myself. Seems like a normal reaction for a teenager. Amarantha interjected. First love is always painful. Camden looked at her with a chuckle. Have you ever had a first love, Amarantha? I had one. She met his gaze. Unfortunately, he didn't turn out to be the man I thought he was. What a shame. What about dessert? You made something special, didn't you? Amarantha rose from the table. Of course, per tartitaten. Your favorite. As she walked out into the kitchen, she heard Camden say to her son, You're lucky to have her. Though I still think you rushed the wedding. It was my decision, father. Really, and I thought. The little pregnancy that ended so happily. Amarantha didn't listen further. She pulled out her phone and quickly typed a message. He's unbearable today. The reply came instantly. Be patient. Things will change soon. She returned with dessert, carefully playing the cordial hostess. Camden tasted the tart first and covered his eyes in pleasure. Divine, you've outdone yourself, Amaranth. Thank you. She lowered her eyes. After dessert they moved into the living room. Camden sat down in a chair, swirling a whiskey glass in his hands. You know, Tobias, I've been thinking about restructuring the company, he remarked carelessly. Tobias tense. It might be time to step back from the business. Turn over management to more energetic people. You're going to retire? Tobias asked incredulously. Not exactly, more like focusing on strategic planning, leaving the operational management to others. And to whom exactly? Camden smiled. It depends on a lot of factors. I need someone I can trust completely. At that moment Amarantha's phone rang. She apologized and left the room, leaving the men alone. 5 minutes later, Tobias returned, pale with a frozen face. Everything okay? She asked. Father wants to discuss something in private, Tobias said mechanically. I need to check the mail. Urgent message from the contractor. He went upstairs. Amarantha returned to the living room. Camden was standing at the window. What did you tell him? She asked. That I was going to expand the board of directors, and that I was thinking of merging with Morgenstern Industries. He took it as a threat to his position. Let him think so. It'll make him more cooperative. Camden turned to her. You look stunning in that dress. I know. Upstairs in the study, Tobias opened the laptop machine. His hands trembled. His father was clearly plotting some kind of multi-pronged scheme, and he suspected he'd end up out of the loop. He always did. A notification popped up on the screen. The synchronization with Amarantha's phone was complete. He'd set it up a month ago, when he'd suspected something wrong. First an unfamiliar number called. Then she started staying late after work. There was a new perfume. Tobias hesitated, digging through other people's messages. Didn't feel right, but something told him that today was his last chance to find out the truth. He opened the messenger and saw a correspondence with an unknown number. The last message was "Be patient. Things will change soon." As he scrolled up the story, he felt the ground go from under his feet. Dozens of messages, intimate, explicit plans, promises, and pictures. And then he saw the contact's name, and he felt nauseous. Tobias closed his eyes, then determinedly copied all the correspondence to his phone, and went downstairs. In the living room, Amarantha and Camden were sitting across from each other, talking quietly about something. They hadn't noticed his appearance. "How long has this been going on?" His voice sounded unexpectedly calm. They turned around at the same time. A look of consternation flashed across Amarantha's face. Camden frowned. "What are you talking about, son?" Tobias picked up the phone. "About your affair." Silence hung, then Camden grinned. "I don't know what you mean." "Don't lie to me," Tobias suddenly shouted. "I've seen everything, every message, every picture." Amarantha turned pale. "Tobias, it's not what you think, really." "And what do I think it is?" "That my father is fucking my wife. That you two are laughing at me together, planning how to get rid of stupid, naive Tobias." Camden stood up. "Calm down, you're being unreasonable." "Unreasonable?" Tobias laughed hysterically. "Oh yes, I've always been an unreasonable son. Not tough enough, not smart enough. Not like you." "Tobias, please." Amarantha began. "Shut up." He threw the phone to the floor. "God, how blind I've been from the very beginning. It's not like you never loved me. I was just a convenient option away to be closer to him." "That's not true," she exclaimed. "Then, when did it start? Before we were married, before you met me? Or did you first decide to marry me and then realize you liked your father better?" Amarantha was silent. Tobias turned to his father. "And you always thought I was a loser." But this, his voice trailed off. "That's low even for you. Don't be dramatic." Camden replied coldly, "After all, we're all adults." Something broke in Tobias at that moment. 32 years of humiliation, condescending looks, unrealized expectations. 32 years in the shadow of a father who had never considered him worthy of even minimal respect. He didn't remember grabbing the kitchen knife that lay on the fruit table. He didn't remember traveling the distance that separated him from Amarantha. All he remembered was her frightened eyes and Camden's cry, "Tobias, no." The first blow had been to the chest. The second was to the stomach. The third again in the chest. Blood was everywhere, on his hands, on Amarantha's white dress, on the carpet. He continued to strike, even when she stopped resisting. Camden tried to pull him away, but was struck in the temple with the hilt of a knife and collapsed unconscious. When Tobias finally stopped, there was a ringing silence in the room. He looked down at his hands, at his wife's body, at his father, who was beginning to regain consciousness. Thanksgiving, the holiday Amarantha had so carefully planned, it had ended in blood and betrayal, like their marriage, like his entire life. Tobias looked down at his hands. There was no more blood. He'd washed it thoroughly in the bathroom, but he could still see the crimson stains on his skin. The mirror reflected a pale face with wet eyes, the face of a murderer. He didn't recognize himself. 6 hours had passed since the murder. Camden had called the police after he regained consciousness. The blow was minor, just a small bruise on his temple and a mild concussion. Tobias didn't resist when the police arrived. He sat next to Amarantha's body, unconcerned. Now he was in an interrogation room, a sterile room with a metal table, 2 chairs, and a full-wall mirror, behind which people must have stood watching him. studying him like an outlandish animal in a zoo. The door opened and a detective entered, introducing himself as Ezra Flint, a short, middle-aged man with shrewd eyes and graying temples. He sat silently across from him and just stared at Tobias for a while. "Would you like anything, water? Coffee?" he finally asked. Tobias shook his head. "Do you understand why you're here?" "Mr. Vale, I killed my wife." Flint nodded as if he'd heard the weather forecast. "Would you like to tell me what happened?" "Isn't it obvious? I discovered my wife sleeping with my father, and I couldn't stand it." "How about more details?" Tobias closed his eyes. The picture appeared before him again. The bloody white dress, Amarantha's wide-open eyes, her mouth whispering his name soundlessly. "I don't remember the details." "Do you remember taking the knife?" "No." "How many times it was stabbed?" "No." "How did you feel when you saw the blood?" Tobias shuddered. "Nothing, emptiness." Flint tapped his fingers on the table. "You know, Mr. Vale, most killers I've dealt with fall into two categories: those who feel euphoric about what they've done, and those who are immediately remorseful. You don't look like either of the former or the latter." "What do I look like?" "A man who has waited all his life for disaster to happen one day." Tobias grinned unhappily. "Perhaps you're right. Tell me about your marriage to Amarantha." Tobias leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes. Their marriage, 3 years, that had started like a fairy tale and ended like a nightmare. "We met in my father's office," he began. "She worked as his secretary, the most beautiful woman I'd ever seen. And she chose me, can you imagine? Not him, the successful, bossy Camden Vale, but me, his insecure son." "What attracted you to her besides her looks?" "She understood me, supported me, believed in me when no one else did. Even your father, especially my father." Tobias remembered their first date. Amarantha wore a simple, blue dress that accentuated the color of her eyes. They had walked along the waterfront, eating ice cream, talking about books and movies. He felt like he was floating above the ground. For the first time in his life, a woman of this caliber showed interest in him. She was from a poor family, Tobias continued, grew up in a trailer park. Single mom, never knew her father. Made it all on her own. Did that appeal to you? Of course, unlike me. She wasn't born with a silver spoon in her mouth. Do you know how many times my father reminded me that I could never have succeeded without his name and money? Flint nodded. Difficult relationship with your father? Tobias laughed bitterly. That's putting it mildly. He remembered his 7th birthday. Camden had promised to be at the party, but had left at the last minute for an important business meeting. Tobias had sobbed all evening, refusing cake and presents. His mother had tried to comfort him, but nothing had worked. And when Camden returned 2 days later, he brought his son an expensive toy and said, "Real men don't cry over little things like that. You need to get stronger, Tobias." Or the time at 14 when Tobias, giddy with excitement, showed his father his first architectural project, a school assignment he'd been working on for weeks. Camden took a quick look at the drawings and remarked, "Not bad for a beginner, but the columns are too massive, and the proportions are off. I'd give you a C+. My father was always demanding." Tobias told the detective. "He thought it built character. In fact, it just killed any confidence in me. And your mother died when I was 16. Breast cancer." Tobias was quiet for a moment. "She was the only person who really loved me. Before Amarantha." Flint made a note in his notebook. "When did you realize you wanted to marry Amarantha?" "After a 6-month relationship. I realized I couldn't live without her. It was an obsession, and she said yes. Right away, yes. We were married 2 months after we got engaged. That was fast. She was pregnant." Flint raised his eyebrows. "You have a child?" "No." "Had a miscarriage in the 13th week?" Tobias swallowed. "Amarantha took it hard. Or so it seemed to me." "Do you doubt the sincerity of her grief?" "Now I do. Now I doubt everything." Tobias remembered the morning it had all happened. He had awakened to Amarantha's screaming. The sheets were covered in blood. At the hospital, the doctor had said that this happened sometimes, that they were young and could try again. Amarantha cried all the way home. Then 3 days later, he overheard her phone conversation. By chance, yeah. It's over, she was telling someone. Of course I'm upset, no. He believes, who doubt it. At the time he'd assumed she was talking to a friend. But now sitting in the interrogation room, he realized it was probably Camden on the other end of the line. When did you start to suspect something was wrong? Flint asked. A couple months ago. She became aloof, stayed late at work more often. New perfume, new clothes. Classic signs, right? So you decided to check her cell phone. Not right away, at first. I convinced myself I was paranoid. That she was just tired. That we were having a temporary crisis. But then yes, I set up a synchronization of our phones. And you found evidence of infidelity. Yeah, messages, pictures, everything. This was tonight, yes. During dinner. Flint was silent for a moment. How did you feel when you saw those messages? Tobias wondered. What did he feel? Shock, fury, pain, emptiness, he finally said. Like something inside me had died. And then you went downstairs. And I wanted to hear them confess. I wanted to know how long it had been going on. And did they know? Father denied everything to the last. Amarantha tried to explain something. But I wouldn't listen. Tobias clenched his fists. And then, it was like I blacked out. Silence hung in the room. Flint sat motionless, watching Tobias. Finally, he asked, do you regret what you did? Tobias looked up. I don't. Honestly, I don't know. Do you realize you're looking at a life sentence? Yes, and that doesn't frighten you. After today, I have nothing left to lose. Flint closed his notebook. We'll continue tomorrow, Mr. Vale. In the meantime, get some rest. When the detective walked out, Tobias was once again alone with his thoughts. The image of Amarantha stood before his eyes. Not bloody and dead, but as he had first seen her. Radiant. Full of life, with a smile that took his breath away. Who was she really? The woman he loved? Or a calculating predator who was using him? In the other room, Detective Flint was leafing through the case files. Camden Vale's testimony was dry and precise. The son had made a jealous scene and attacked his wife. He, Camden, had tried to intervene, but had been hit and lost consciousness. When he woke up, Amarantha was dead, and Tobias was sitting next to the body. Not a word about the affair, not a hint as to the reason for his son's breakdown. Flint sighed. Something didn't add up here. He pulled out his cell phone and dialed a number. Detective Flint, he said, I need to speak to the Vale family's housekeeper, Octavia Reed. A few hours later, an older woman with a straight back and a penetrating look in her brown eyes appeared at the station. Despite her age, Flint knew she was 67. She moved with surprising grace and confidence. Miss Reed, thank you for coming. Flint pointed to a chair. I came for Tobias. Her voice was low and melodic. That boy has suffered all his life from his father. What happened is a tragedy. But I'm not surprised. Have you worked for the Vale family for long? 30 years. I remember Tobias since he was 2 years old. What was he like as a child? Quiet, sensitive. Always tried to please his father. But Camden was never satisfied. A boy could draw a beautiful picture, and his father would find flaws in it. Could get A's in all but one subject, and Camden focused on that particular B. What about Amarantha? When did she come into their lives? Octavia pressed her lips together. 5 years ago, Camden hired her as his secretary. A beautiful, smart girl. But there was something about her that was calculating. You disliked her from the start. I saw the way she looked at Camden. Not like a subordinate to her boss, but like a woman to a man. But then she switched to Tobias, and I thought I'd made a mistake. But I kept noticing oddities. The long looks between her and Camden. The way she would sometimes linger in his office after work. The way she'd suddenly change plans if he called. Do you think their affair began before she met Tobias? I'm sure of it, Octavia said firmly. One day, about a month before she started dating Tobias, I walked into Camden's office without knocking. They were standing too close together. When they saw me, they recoiled. Did you tell anyone about this? Who? Tobias? It would have broken his heart, Camden. he would have fired me on the spot. What about Amarantha's pregnancy? Octavia frowned. That was weird. She didn't seem happy when she announced it. More like satisfied. Like she'd accomplished an important task. And the miscarriage even weirder. She hardly grieved at all. Camden too. Flint made notes in his notebook. What can you tell me about Amarantha's childhood? Not much. She didn't like to talk about the past. I know she grew up in poverty with a single mom. Never knew her father. Worked from the age of 16 to pay for college. Ambitious girl. Very. One day she said to me, Octavia, I'll never be poor again, never. There was such determination. Almost frightening. Do you think she loved Tobias? Octavia was silent for a long moment. I think she convinced herself she did it. Was easier to live with herself that way. And Camden. She wanted his power, his money, his position, but to love a man like that. I doubt it. What kind of man is he? Camden, cold, calculating. Never does anything for nothing. Always with a profit in mind. A fine businessman, but a terrible father and husband. Did he mistreat his wife not physically, but psychologically? He slowly destroyed her day after day, year after year. By the time she died, there was almost nothing left of the old Lydia. Lydia is Tobias's mother, yes. A fine woman, too good for Camden. What did she die of? Officially breast cancer. But I think she just lost the will to live. Gave all her love to her son and husband. And all she got in return was criticism and indifference. Flint was silent for a moment, pondering what he had heard. Do you think Tobias knew of the affair? Between father and wife? Suspected, perhaps. But to know for sure, no. Otherwise, he wouldn't have had the stamina to live with it for so long. What makes you so sure? Because he's too much like his mother. Just as sensitive, just as devoted. For people like that, betrayal isn't just pain. It's the destruction of their entire world. Flint nodded. One last question. Miss Reed, have you ever seen Tobias show aggression? Violence? Anything that would indicate a capacity for violence? Octavia smiled sadly. Detective, there is a capacity for violence in all of us. We just have to find the right button and push it. Camden and Amarantha together created the perfect storm. When Octavia left, Flint sat, looking at the crime scene photos for a long time. The luxurious living room. The white carpet drenched in blood. Amarantha Vale's body in a once elegant dress, now soaked in purple, multiple stab wounds. 18 according to the pathologist's preliminary report. A knife thrown nearby in the next room. Camden Vale was testifying. His voice, recorded on a tape recorder, sounded calm and judicious. No shadow of grief or shock. Just the facts, the timing, the sequence of events, his son's actions. Flint sighed. This case was both simple and incredibly complex. Simple because the perpetrator was known and had pleaded guilty. Complex because the true causes of the tragedy were rooted in years of family dysfunction, manipulation, and pain. He walked back toward the interrogation room. Tobias Vale sat in the same posture, hunched over, staring into the void in front of him. The pale face, with its sharpened features, seemed like a mask. Mr. Vale, Flint called out quietly. I have a few more questions. Tobias looked up slowly. Ask away. Tell me how you grew up. What was your childhood like? Tobias grinned. Does that matter now? Perhaps more than you realize. Tobias sighed. What do you want to hear? That my father never came to my school plays. That I once spent a week preparing for a science Olympiad, won first place, and he didn't even remember it. That when my mom died, he was on a business trip and only flew in for the funeral. Were you angry with him all the time, but always suppressed it? My mom taught me to be tolerant, to realize my dad had a hard job, a lot of responsibility. And how did your parents meet? Tobias frowned. Mom was modeling. They met at a charity event. Got married 6 months later. Dad always said it was love at first sight, though now I doubt if he was even capable of love. Was your mother happy in her marriage? She tried to be happy, always told me. Tobias, happiness is a choice we make every day. It wasn't until I got older that I realized how much pain was behind those words. Flint nodded. When did you decide to become an architect? At 15 showed my father my first sketches, and he said I had no talent. That only strengthened my resolve. Was he against your choice of profession? No, just didn't think I wasn't good enough. But when I won the student design competition, he suddenly got the idea to bring me into the company. Did you accept, of course? All my life I dreamed of his approval. And how did it go? Tobias smiled bitterly, the same as always. He criticized every project I did, made me redo it 10 times, and then found flaws anyway. Why didn't you leave for another company? Do you think he would have let me? Everyone in our town knows Camden Vale. One word from him, and I wouldn't have been accepted anywhere. Flint tapped his pencil on the table thoughtfully. When was the last time you felt happy, Tobias? The question caught Vale off guard. He was silent for a long time, as if going over memories. The day I proposed to Amarantha, he finally said. We were at a picnic by the lake. She was laughing, the sun playing in her hair. I got down on one knee and pulled out the ring. She was crying when she said yes. I was sure they were tears of happiness. And now I think it was great acting. The interrogation room seemed smaller and smaller to Tobias with each passing hour. The walls pressed and the air grew thick and heavy. Detective Flint sat across from him, waiting patiently for the conversation to continue. Outside the window, dawn was breaking. The first day of a new reality, in which Amarantha no longer existed, and Tobias himself had become a murderer. Are you ready to continue? Mr. Vale, Flint asked. Opening his notebook, Tobias nodded. The sleepless night had left deep shadows on his face. His eyes red and sunken. He didn't cry. He just lay on the hard bunk of the holding cell and stared at the ceiling. Before we begin, I want to inform you that your father is demanding to see you. Tobias tensed. Why? He says he wants to explain himself. What's there to explain about? He slept with my wife behind my back. It's pretty clear. Flint shrugged. Perhaps, but I thought you should know. The decision is yours. Tobias was silent for a moment, then nodded. All right, I'll meet with him. But on one condition. What's that? You will attend? Flint raised his eyebrows in surprise. Are you sure the conversation may be private? That's exactly why. If we're alone, he'll manipulate me into questioning my own adequacy. He's always done that. Whatever you say. Flint made a note in his notebook. In the meantime, if you don't mind, I'd like to revisit what happened on the day of the murder. What exactly are you interested in? Tell me what you were thinking at the moment you picked up the knife. Tobias closed his eyes. An image surfaced in his mind. His hand clutching the handle of the kitchen knife. A strange sensation of lightness in his body. It's hard to explain, he said quietly. It was like I was split in two. Part of me was in a daze, unable to believe what was happening. And the other part was almost relieved. Relief, yes. Like I'd finally stopped pretending. Like the mask I'd worn for years was falling off. And I could see the truth about myself, about them. And what is that truth? Tobias looked Flint straight in the eye. That I hated them both, and myself for letting them use me. You knew of your wife's connection to your father. Before that day, I suspected it, but I didn't want to believe it. It was easier to close my eyes, pretend everything was all right. How long did you suspect? 6 months, maybe more. Little things added up to a picture, but I refused to see it. What little things? Phone conversations that cut off when I entered the room. Sudden business dinners. The strange tension when the three of us got together. And the stares they thought I didn't notice. But I saw the way they looked at each other. There was a knock on the door, and a policeman entered the room. Detective Flint. Mr. Vale is here. Flint nodded. Sent him in. Camden Vale looked impeccable, even after a sleepless night. The dark blue suit fit perfectly. Not a single crease, not a single unnecessary movement. Only a small bandage on his temple reminded him of last night's incident. He gave the detective a brief nod and turned to his son. Tobias' father Camden sat down at the table, folding his hands in front of him. You look terrible. Murder is not conducive to a good night's sleep. That's what I wanted to talk about. About your behavior, Tobias grinned. The deed. You can't even call things by their proper names. Right now, okay. The act of killing your wife. In a fit of uncontrollable rage. And whose fault is it that rage arose? Camden inside. Listen, son. What you saw, what you think you saw. It's not exactly what it looks like, really. What about the dozens of messages? The pictures I've seen, everything, father. Every word, every picture. Adult relationships can be complicated. Don't you dare. Tobias pounded his fist on the table. Don't you dare justify what you did. I'm not making excuses, I'm trying to explain. What's there to explain? You slept with my wife. Camden looked away. It all started before you met her. Tobias froze. What? Amarantha and we had a relationship. When she first started at the company. And you didn't think to tell me that. When I started dating her, I tried implied that she wasn't right for you. That you shouldn't rush into. Hinted you should have told me straight out. And what would that have changed? You were in love, obsessed with her. Tobias shook his head. That's unbelievable. So you ended the relationship. When we started dating. Camden was silent. Father. You ended the relationship. For a while. Tobias covered his face with his hands. My goodness, and the pregnancy. Was the baby yours? I don't know. Camden replied quietly. Maybe. And you let me marry her. I thought it was best for everyone. For everybody. Or for you, so your reputation wouldn't suffer. Camden remained silent. Flint, who had been watching the conversation, coughed quietly. Mr. Vale, you claim that the connection between you and Amarantha began before she met your son. Yes. Camden straightened his back. About a year before she and Tobias met, and resumed after they were married a short time later. After the miscarriage. Tobias jumped up, knocking over his chair. A miscarriage? Which happened because you didn't want this baby. Because you were afraid it would turn out to be yours. Tobias calmed down. Flint gestured him to a chair. Carry on, Mr. Vale. Camden sighed. Tobias is right. I didn't want that child. But I had nothing to do with the miscarriage. I swear it. Don't you dare. Tobias hissed. Don't you dare swear after everything you've done. Son, I understand how you feel. No, you don't. You've never understood. All my life you've treated me as a misunderstanding. A mistake to be tolerated. I've tried, God. How I've tried to earn your approval. And you even stole my wife from me. Tears came to Tobias's eyes. Camden turned away, unable to look at his son. I didn't mean to hurt you. He finally uttered. That's a lie. My whole life is a story of you hurting me every day. Every hour, and when the man I thought really loved me finally showed up, you couldn't stand it. She didn't love you, Camden said sharply. Never. Tobias froze. What? Amarantha? She never loved you. She used you to be close to me. To be part of the Vale family. Detective Flint raised his hand. That's enough, Mr. Vale. I think you'd better leave. No. Tobias shook his head. Let him speak. I want to hear the whole truth. Camden met his son's gaze. The truth is that Amarantha was a calculating woman. With enormous ambition, she wanted wealth, status, power. At first she tried to get it through me. When she realized I wasn't going to leave your mother, she switched to you. And after Mom died, why weren't you two together then? By then, she had already realized that I would never marry her. That she'd always be second best. And you offered her a legal marriage. A position in society, and she accepted. So why did you two come back to each other? Camden was quiet for a moment. Because we couldn't be without each other. Passion, obsession. Call it whatever you want. It was stronger than us. Tobias closed his eyes. Go away, son. Go away. I don't want to see you. Camden rose at the door. He turned around. I'll hire the best lawyers. We'll argue that it was a temporary lapse of judgment. Tobias laughed bitterly, almost hysterically. You still don't understand. I don't care. Let it be life or even the death penalty. I have nothing to lose. When Camden came out, Tobias went limp in his chair. Flint silently handed him a glass of water. Do you believe him? Tobias asked. Taking a sip. It's not for me to decide what's true and what's false in this story, replied Flint cautiously, but I do have something that may shed some light on certain points. He pulled a small leather-bound book from a folder. This was found in your wife's purse. Looks like a diary. Tobias stared at the book. Have you read it, part of it? I think you should. Familiarize yourself with some of the entries. Flint opened the diary to a laid-in page and laid it in front of Tobias. March 5th. Today is our wedding anniversary. 3 years. Tobias gave me a gold bracelet and threw me a candlelight dinner. He's so attentive, so caring. Sometimes I feel unbearably ashamed of what I do to him. But then I remember what it's all about and go on, playing the part of the loving wife. After all, he gets what he wants, the appearance of love. And I'm getting closer to my goal. Tobias turned the page. April 20th. Met with Kay. Today the passion between us has not subsided. Despite the years, he promises we can soon be together openly. He says he's going to hand over the company to T, and he'll step out of the shadows. Then we won't have to hide. I asked how he plans to explain our relationship to his son. He just laughed. Tobias always does what he's told. Sometimes I'm frightened by his cruelty, but that's part of his appeal, isn't it? Tobias clenched his fists so white, his knuckles turned white. There's more. Flint nodded and flipped a few pages. November 2nd. Kay postpones our plans again. Says the time isn't right yet. That we have to wait. How long can we wait? It's been 5 years. -1 years. I've been living a double life. Sometimes I hate him almost as much as I want to. And sometimes I think he's just using me, like everyone else, that I'm just entertainment to him. A toy to take away when he gets bored. Maybe I should tell Tobias the truth. It would ruin them both, father and son. And then maybe I'd finally be free. Tobias slammed the journal shut. That's enough, I understand. There's one more thing. Flint pulled another document from the folder. Amarantha's bank statement. A secret account you didn't know about. How much is in there? $2 million. Transfers in small amounts over the last 2 years. From my father? Not exactly. From a company under the guise of consulting services. Tobias shook his head. So she was also stealing. I don't think it was pure theft. Rather, your father was providing her with financial independence, in case their relationship became public, or in case she wanted to get rid of me. Silence hung in the room. Flint watched Tobias carefully. Finally he asked, how do you feel now, having learned all this? Tobias was silent for a long time. Emptiness, he finally uttered. And a strange relief. It's as if the weight I've been carrying for years is gone. Do you still love her? I love the image she created for me. An illusion, the real Amarantha I never seemed to know. And your father, how do you feel about him? Pity, Tobias said in surprise. He could have had true love, a family, but he chose power and manipulation and ended up alone. Flint nodded. There's someone else who wants to talk to you. Octavia Reed. Octavia, why? She said she had something important to tell you. Something she's been hiding for too long. Tobias frowned. All right. I'll talk to her. A few minutes later, an older woman entered the room. When she saw Tobias, she barely held back her tears. My boy, she sat down across from him. How did it come to this? Hello, Octavia. Tobias smiled weakly. You always said I was too soft for this world, and too kind for the Vale family. She took his hand. Tobias, there's something I need to tell you about your father. About what kind of man he really was. I know what kind of man he was. No, you don't. Not everything. Octavia took a deep breath. Your mother didn't die of cancer. Tobias tensed. What? Lydia killed herself, an overdose of sleeping pills. Camden paid the doctors to give a natural cause of death. But why? Because she found out he was cheating on her for years, with different women. When she confronted him, he didn't deny it. All he said was, you always knew who you were marrying. Tobias turned pale, and she couldn't live with that. She left a letter for you, but Camden destroyed it. What did it say? She apologized for leaving you with him. She said she loved you more than anything in the world. I warned you not to become like your father. Tobias closed his eyes. His mother's face came to mind. Gentle, always a little sad. He remembered how in the last months of her life, she had often cried locked in the bathroom. How his father had been home less and less often. How once he'd overheard them arguing. His mother yelling something about betrayal. And his father coldly replying that she was over-dramatizing. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" he asked quietly. "I was afraid," Camden threatened, "that if I said a word he'd destroy me. And I had a sick sister to take care of. Couldn't lose my job." Octavia wiped away a tear. "But it doesn't matter now. Now you must know the truth." And Amarantha, did she know about it? I don't think so. But she quickly realized what kind of man Camden was. And she chose him anyway, an odd choice. Not for a girl who grew up in poverty and lived in fear of going back there again. To her, Camden was the epitome of power, of security. And me. You were an insurance policy. And perhaps the only person who truly loved her. Though she didn't appreciate it. Flint, who had been silently watching the conversation, cleared his throat. "Miss Reed, are you claiming that Camden Vale bribed the medical staff to cover up his wife's suicide?" "Yes, Dr. Harris, who signed the death certificate, suddenly retired a month later and moved to Florida. In a new house." Flint made a note in his notebook. "I'll verify that information." Octavia turned to Tobias. "You need a good lawyer and a psychiatrist to confirm that you acted under the influence." "Why?" Tobias asked tiredly. "What difference does it make where I spend the rest of my life? In prison or the Vale Mansion? Everywhere else I have been and will be a prisoner." "Don't say that." Octavia squeezed his hand. "You can start a new life after what I've done. You'll pay for it, but someday you'll get out. And you can be a different person. The person you always wanted to be. Not the person Camden tried to make you into." When Octavia left, Flint was silent for a while, giving Tobias a chance to gather his thoughts. Then he asked softly, ready to continue. Tobias nodded. "I want to ask you bluntly. Was Amarantha's murder a spontaneous act? Or did you plan it?" Tobias looked up. "What would change my answer? Many things. Premeditated murder and murder in a state of passion are different articles, different sentences." Tobias was silent for a long time. Finally uttered, "I knew something was going to happen that day. Didn't specifically plan the murder, but I felt it was the end." Explain. "I put a tracker on Amarantha's cell phone a few weeks before Thanksgiving. Read their correspondence, saw the pictures, and I realized I couldn't live a lie anymore. Something had to happen." "You deliberately invited your father to Thanksgiving?" "Yes, I wanted to see them together, to observe, see if what I suspected was true. And when you became convinced, I snapped." "But it wasn't a sudden impulse. It was a release from years of built-up anger, from constant humiliation, from living in the shadows." Flint made a note in his notebook. "You know, Mr. Vale, I've seen a lot of family tragedies in my career. But your story, all three of you, your father, your wife, are hostage to your own desires and fears. Hostages, that's a good definition. Your father is hostage to his need for control and power. Amarantha is hostage to her fear of poverty and her hunger for status. And you and I am hostage to the illusion that I can earn their love." Tobias finished. Flint nodded. "A sad triangle. You know what's most ironic? In the end, we all lost. The father lost his reputation and his son. Amarantha lost her life, and me. I lost myself." "Not necessarily," Flint said quietly. "Sometimes at the darkest point, the path to light begins." Tobias smiled bitterly. "Sounds like a phrase from a motivational poster, maybe. But I've seen people who've gotten through the worst of it and found a way to move on." Tobias shook his head. "I'm not looking for redemption. I deserve to be punished for what I did. Punishment doesn't preclude redemption." Tobias looked at his hands. The hands that had held the knife, that had taken a life. "You know, at the moment I was stabbing, I didn't see Amarantha. I saw all those years of lies, manipulation, falsity. I saw my mother crying in a locked room. I saw my father sneering contemptuously at my efforts. I saw myself always striving but never achieving. You didn't just kill Amarantha. Yes, I killed the past. My past. Tobias raised his eyes to Flint. Does that sound crazy? No? It sounds like a man who held back the pain too long. Tobias nodded. I'm willing to make a full confession and accept any punishment. Are you sure your father talked about the best lawyers? I don't want anything from him. Never again. Flint pulled out a tape recorder and turned on the tape. Tobias Vale, are you ready to testify in the Amarantha Vale murder trial? Yes. Tobias straightened up in his chair. I, Tobias Vale, admit that on November 18th of this year, I murdered my wife Amarantha Vale. He spoke smoothly without emotion, describing the events of that day. When he finished, Flint turned off the recorder and was silent for a while. What now? Tobias asked. Now the trial. Given the circumstances and your heartfelt confession, you'll probably be charged with second-degree murder, not first-degree. How many years is that? 15 to 25 with the possibility of parole. Tobias nodded. Fair enough. Do you have someone you'd like to call a friend? A coworker? No. All my relationships have been through my father or Amarantha. I drove myself into this cage. Flint stood up. You'll be transferred to the county jail until your trial. If you need anything, let me know. Tobias smiled weakly. Thank you, detective, for listening, for not convicting me right away. That's my job. Flint headed for the door, but stopped. You know, Mr. Vale, there are rarely only victims or only villains in life. More often than not, we're all a little bit of both. And how do you live with that day by day? By recognizing your mistakes and trying not to repeat them. When the door closed behind Flint, Tobias was alone for the first time in years. He felt a strange calmness. It was as if the enormous weight that had been weighing on his shoulders all his life was finally gone. The price had been exorbitant. Amarantha's life, his own freedom, the collapse of everything he believed in. But beneath the wreckage of his former existence, he was beginning to discern the contours of something new, something real. Amarantha, he whispered into the emptiness of the room. Forgive me, it wasn't you I loved. It was my dream of you. Sunlight fell into the room through the window, painting a golden rectangle on the floor. Tobias stared at the play of light and shadow and thought of his mother's words, that she liked to repeat, the truth may hurt, but it is the only thing that gives freedom. For the first time, he fully understood the meaning of those words.